One week before Father's Day, I overheard my daughter and her husband laughing about their luxury trip while assuming I'd babysit the kids all weekend. He'll do it. He never says no, they said. They didn't ask me. They decided for me. I quietly booked my own getaway instead. That night, she called Dad, "Where are you? Everyone is waiting." I smiled and replied, "Stop waiting. I already made plans for myself. Thank you so much for joining Dad Family Revenge today. I truly appreciate your support. Tell me, which city or country are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments. Please note, this story contains fictional elements for entertainment and learning. Any resemblance to names or places is purely coincidental, but the lesson remains valuable. My name is Henry Walker. I am 68 years old, and I have spent most of those years believing that a good father is one who never makes his children feel like a burden. I believed that so completely that I forgot to ask whether the same rule applied in reverse. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late May when everything changed. Not with a fight, not with tears, with a casserole dish. Emily had borrowed it 3 weeks earlier for a potluck dinner at her neighborhood association. I had reminded her twice gently, the way I reminded her of everything gently, so she would never feel pressured. That Wednesday, I finally drove the 40 minutes to her house in Maplewood to pick it up myself. The front door was unlocked, the way it always was, in the middle of the day. I knocked twice on the frame and called out, "Emily, it's Dad." No answer came back. But from the kitchen at the far end of the hall, I could hear voices, Emily's and Jason's, easy and warm, the way people sound when they believe no one is listening. I should have knocked louder. I should have turned around. Instead, I stood there in the hallway with my hand resting on the doorframe, and I listened. "The balcony cabin is confirmed," Jason was saying. I could hear him tapping something on his phone. "Check-in is Friday the 13th. Dinner reservation Saturday night is at 7. Emily laughed, that bright, satisfied laugh she had whenever a plan was coming together. "Your mom is going to love the shore excursion. I already packed her sunscreen." "She'll be thrilled," Jason agreed. "Your dad all set with the kids?" "Of course." Emily's voice was easy, unbothered, the way you sound when you're talking about something that has already been decided. "Dad will handle it. He never says no." My hand tightened on the doorframe. "You sure he knows?" Jason asked. "He will," Emily said simply. And then she laughed again, softer this time, already moving on to something else. "He will. Not he agreed. Not he said yes. He will, as though my cooperation were a weather forecast. Something reliable. Something that required no input from me." I stood there for another moment, long enough to hear Emily read out the name of the restaurant on the ship's upper deck, long enough to hear Jason ask whether they should upgrade the beverage package. Then I stepped back from the doorframe, walked to the front porch, and set the casserole dish down on the top step. I did not knock. I did not call out again. I walked to my car, sat down behind the wheel, and closed the door. The engine stayed off. Through the windshield, I could see the warm glow of the kitchen window. Yellow light spilling out into the late afternoon, the kind of light that looks like home from the outside. My chest felt tight, not with anger exactly, but with something that sat heavier. Recognition, maybe. The feeling of finally seeing something clearly after a long time of choosing not to look. He never says no. She was right. I never did. Not when she called me at 6 in the morning because Noah had a fever and Jason had an early meeting. Not when she texted me during my lunch with an old friend, asking if I could pick Emma up from school. Not when she handed me a grocery list at my own front door and asked if I could swing by the store on my way to her house. Every time I said yes. Every time I smiled. because I told myself that was what love looked like, showing up without being asked, staying without being thanked, giving without keeping score. But sitting in that car, in the quiet of that late May afternoon, I heard something in Emily's voice that I had never let myself hear before. Not gratitude, not even affection, really. Just certainty. The flat, uncomplicated certainty of someone who has never once considered the possibility of hearing the word no. My daughter had not forgotten to ask me. She had simply decided that asking was unnecessary. The kitchen light stayed warm and yellow behind the glass. Inside, Emily was planning a cruise. She was choosing wine pairings and shore excursions and the right dress for the formal dinner night. And in her plans, I existed the way a piece of furniture exists, useful, familiar, and already in place. I reached over and picked up my phone from the passenger seat. My hands felt steadier than I expected. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Then I looked back at that glowing kitchen window one last time. I started the car. I drove home the long way through the old neighborhood, where Margaret and I had raised Emily, past the elementary school with the cracked sidewalk out front, past the park where I used to push Emily on the swings until my arms gave out, and she begged for 5 more minutes. I drove slowly, and I thought about all the times I had said yes. Then I thought, for the first time in many years, about what it might feel like to say something different. I did not have an answer yet. But somewhere between the familiar streets and the quiet of my own driveway, something shifted inside me. Something patient and long overdue, like a door that had been stuck for years, finally deciding to move. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom. Margaret and I had shared for 31 years, listening to the particular silence of a house that used to hold more people than it does now. By 5 in the morning, I gave up trying and went downstairs to make coffee. I was standing at the kitchen counter halfway through my second cup, watching the backyard slowly come into color as the sun cleared the tree line, when my phone buzzed against the countertop. It was Emily. Not a call, a message, and attached to it a file. My thumb hovered over the attachment for a second before I opened it. The document was neatly formatted, the kind of thing you put together when you want to look organized. At the top, in clean, bold letters, it read, "Dad's schedule for Father's Day weekend." I set my coffee mug down. 6 a.m. Prepare breakfast for Emma and Noah. 8:30. Drive children to Saturday enrichment program, pickup at 11. 12 p.m., lunch at home. 2 p.m., help Noah with reading practice. 4:30, outdoor play, weather permitting. 6 p.m., dinner preparation. 7:30, bath time for Noah. 8:30, reading before bed, lights out by 9. I read it once. Then I read it again, slower. There was no question mark anywhere in that document. No "if you're available," or "let me know if this works." Just a sequence of tasks laid out hour by hour from the moment the sun came up until the children were asleep. Beside every item, my name was implied, the way a job title is implied, not written, but understood to belong to whoever was filling the role. At the very bottom, in a slightly warmer font than the rest, Emily had added, "The kids are so excited to spend time with you, Dad. You're the best." My throat tightened in a way I had not expected. I put the phone face down on the counter and stood there with both hands wrapped around my coffee mug, staring out at the backyard. The old oak tree near the fence was in full leaf. Margaret had planted it the year Emily started kindergarten, and now it was so large that it shaded half the yard by mid-morning. After a while, I picked up the phone and called Claire. Claire Thompson had been Margaret's closest friend for nearly 20 years before Margaret passed. She had shown up at my door 3 days after the funeral with a pot of soup and a box of Margaret's favorite tea, and said very simply, "I'm not going anywhere, Henry." She had kept that promise. In 4 years, she had become the person I called, when I needed someone who would tell me the truth without making me feel foolish for not seeing it sooner. She answered on the second ring, her voice already alert, the way it always was, even early. "Henry." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," I said. Then I paused. Emily sent me a schedule. A brief silence on her end. "What kind of schedule?" "For Father's Day weekend." I picked up the phone and read her the list, all of it from the 6 a.m. breakfast to the 9 p.m. lights out. My voice stayed steady through most of it. It wobbled slightly at the line about bath time. When I finished, Claire did not respond immediately. I could hear her setting something down on a hard surface, her own mug probably. Then she said carefully, "Henry, did she ask you first?" The question hung in the air of my kitchen like smoke. I opened my mouth, closed it. My chest felt like something inside it had dropped an inch. "She sent me the schedule," I said finally. "That is not the same thing," Claire said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." "Henry," her voice shifted gentler now, but with an edge underneath it, the way her voice always got when she was about to say something she had been holding back. "That's not a schedule. That's a job description. And you didn't apply for the position." I laughed, short and humorless, and felt my eyes sting in a way that caught me off guard. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed through it. "She wrote at the bottom that the kids are excited to see me," I said. "I'm sure they are," Claire said. "That part I believe completely. But Emily didn't write that schedule because she was thinking about you. She wrote it because she was thinking about herself. There's a difference." I knew she was right. I had known it the moment I read the document. Knowing it and sitting with it were 2 different things entirely, though. And sitting with it in my quiet kitchen on a Thursday morning with Margaret's oak tree filling up the window and my coffee going cold was harder than I had anticipated. "I keep thinking about what she said yesterday," I told Claire. "He never says no." Claire's voice came back firm and without hesitation. "Then maybe it's time he did." I looked down at my phone at the schedule still open on the screen. All those hours, all those tasks. A whole weekend of my life arranged by someone else, delivered to me like a memo from an employer I had never agreed to work for. "What am I going to do, Claire?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I think you do." After I hung up, I stood at the counter for a long time. Then I walked to the kitchen table, sat down, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I asked myself a question I had spent years avoiding. Not what Emily needed. Not what the grandchildren needed. Not what the family expected. What did I want? The answer surprised me with how quickly it came and with how long it had apparently been waiting. Claire showed up at my door Friday afternoon without calling ahead. That was not unusual for her. What was unusual was the look on her face, not worried exactly, but the careful, deliberate expression she wore when she had information she was not sure how to deliver. "Put on another pot," she said, stepping inside. "We need to talk." I had been sitting in my old study most of the morning, the room where I used to draft construction blueprints before retirement, staring at the question Claire had left me with the day before. I had not arrived at an answer yet. Or rather, I had arrived at one and kept talking myself back from the edge of it. I made the coffee. We sat down at the kitchen table. "Do you know a woman named Patricia Patterson?" Claire asked, wrapping both hands around her mug. I thought for a moment. "Emily mentioned her once or twice. She watched Emma and Noah sometimes." "She did," Claire said. "Until about 3 weeks ago." She paused, choosing her words with the same care she used for everything important. "My neighbor Judith teaches piano to Mrs. Patterson's daughter. Judith mentioned it to me this morning because she thought I might want to know. Emily called Mrs. Patterson and canceled the Father's Day weekend booking. I felt something go still in my chest. She canceled it. Without rescheduling, without explanation beyond family will handle it. Claire's voice was even, but her jaw tightened slightly. Mrs. Patterson had already turned down 2 other bookings for that weekend. She lost the income and the deposit she had paid for her own plans. I pushed back from the table and stood up, needing suddenly to move. I walked to the kitchen window, gripped the edge of the counter with both hands, and looked out at the yard. The afternoon light was long and gold across the grass. "When did she cancel?" I asked. "The same week she sent you that schedule," Claire said. The timeline landed like a stone dropping into still water. Emily had not forgotten to arrange childcare. She had arranged it professionally properly and then dismantled it deliberately. She had looked at Mrs. Patterson's contract and looked at her cruise itinerary and made a calculation. A clean, efficient, unsentimental calculation. "Do you know what that cruise package costs?" I asked, turning back to face Claire. Judith looked it up, Claire said. "Balcony cabin dinner package, 2 shore excursions." She estimated somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000 for the 4 of them. "And Mrs. Patterson's weekend rate?" Judith didn't know exactly, but enough to matter. I walked back to the table and sat down heavily. My hands, I noticed, were trembling slightly against the tabletop, not from anger, but from the particular physical shock of understanding something you had been half knowing for a while. I pressed them flat against the wood to steady them. "Claire," I said. She didn't forget to ask me. "No," Claire said. Her voice was quiet and very firm. She decided not to. I exhaled slowly through my nose. The kitchen felt smaller than it usually did, the walls a little closer, the ceiling a little lower. I thought about Mrs. Patterson, a woman I had never met who had turned down other work, made her own plans, and then received a phone call that erased her weekend in a single sentence. I thought about the matter-of-fact ease with which Emily must have made that call. "Family will handle it." "She had a professional arrangement," I said. "A real one, with a contract. And she canceled it because she decided I was a cheaper option." "You were a free option," Claire corrected gently. "That's not the same thing." Something cracked open in my chest at that word. Free. Not available. Not willing. Free the way a parking space is free, the way a spare bedroom is free. Something you use because it costs you nothing, and therefore requires no gratitude and no consideration. "I spent 38 years building things," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Bridges, overpasses, structures that had to hold weight, that had to be sound. You cannot cut corners on load-bearing elements, Claire. The whole thing comes down." Claire reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her grip was firm. "Henry, what are you going to do?" I looked down at her hand on mine. Then I looked up at the window, at the late afternoon light going amber across Margaret's oak tree. "She thinks she knows exactly what I'm going to do," I said. "She does," Claire agreed. "Because you've always done it." "Yes." I turned back to face her, and I felt something settle in me. Not anger, not bitterness, but something cooler and more deliberate. Something that had been warming up for 2 days and had finally reached temperature. But Claire, she canceled a professional because she believed I was a certainty, which means she has never once considered the possibility that I might surprise her. Claire studied my face for a long moment. Then very slowly, she smiled. It was the kind of smile Margaret used to call her This ought to be interesting smile, the one that meant she could see where something was going and approved of the destination. "Henry Walker," she said. "What are you planning?" I picked up my coffee mug and took a long, slow sip. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but I didn't mind. "I'm going to give Emily exactly what she planned for," I said. "And I'm going to make sure she remembers it for the rest of her life." I had been meaning to return Emily's spare key for weeks. She had given it to me 2 years earlier after a pipe burst in her laundry room while she and Jason were in Denver for a long weekend. I had driven over, let myself in, turned off the water main, and waited 3 hours for the plumber. Afterward, Emily had pressed the key into my hand and said, "Keep it, Dad, just in case." I had kept it in the small ceramic bowl by my front door ever since the one Margaret painted at a community pottery class the summer before she got sick. That Saturday morning, I dropped it into my shirt pocket and drove to Maplewood. I told myself I was returning the key because I no longer needed it. That was true. What was also true was that the drive gave me something to do with my hands and my thoughts, while I worked out the shape of the decision I had made in my kitchen the night before. Emily's car was gone. She had mentioned a shopping trip with Linda Miller earlier in the week. Jason's truck sat in the driveway, which meant he was home. I pulled up to the curb, climbed out, and walked up the front path. The storm door was shut, but the main door behind it stood open the way it often did on warm mornings, to let air move through the house. I was 2 steps from the porch when I heard Jason's voice drifting out through the screen, bright loose, the voice of a man, deep in a comfortable conversation. I stopped walking. No, it's handled," Jason was saying. I could hear him moving around the living room, the soft thud of his footsteps on the hardwood. "Emily's dad is taking the kids the whole weekend. Guy's been retired for 3 years. He's got nothing but time." A laugh from whoever was on the other end of the call. Jason laughed too. "Honestly," he continued, "I don't even think he minds. What else is he going to do, right? Sit home and watch the History Channel." Another laugh, louder this time. "Exactly, it's perfect. Kids are covered, in-laws are impressed, and it costs us exactly nothing." My feet had stopped moving of their own accord. I was standing on the front path, 3 feet from the porch steps, with the spare key pressing warm against my palm where I had taken it out of my pocket without realizing it. It costs us exactly nothing. I had built a highway overpass once early in my career that had to carry 40,000 vehicles a day. The project engineer had tried to reduce the rebar density in the support columns to cut costs. I had refused. I had written a 14-page report and taken it to the project director and said very clearly that load-bearing structures do not get cheaper without getting weaker. The overpass was built to spec. It was still standing 40 years later. Jason Miller had just described me as a rebar reduction. The screen door banged open, and Emma came flying out, ponytail streaming behind her sneakers, untied the way she always moved when she was running toward something, rather than away from it. She pulled up short when she saw me, brown eyes going wide. "Grandpa?" Her whole face lit up like a lamp switching on. She threw her arms around my waist and squeezed with the full force of her 10-year-old conviction. "Are you staying today? Can we play cards? Noah's been cheating at Go Fish, and I need a witness." I hugged her back, and my arms held on a beat longer than usual. My throat felt thick and tight. "Not today, sweetheart," I managed. I was just dropping something off. Emma pulled back and looked up at me with those sharp, observant eyes that reminded me so much of Margaret. It sometimes made my sternum ache. "You okay, Grandpa? Your voice sounds funny." "Allergies," I said. "The oak pollen's been bad this week." She accepted that with the trusting ease of a child who has not yet learned that adults lie about the small things to protect the larger ones. She squeezed my hand, once told me Noah was inside destroying her Lego city, and disappeared back through the door in the same streak of motion she had arrived in. I stood on the path for another moment. Through the screen, I could hear Jason winding down his call, something about dinner reservations, something about a follow-up meeting with a contractor. His voice was pleasant and self-assured, the voice of a man who believed the weekend ahead was fully organized and completely under control. I looked down at the spare key in my hand. Then I put it back in my shirt pocket. I had told myself I was returning it because I no longer needed it. Standing on that path, I understood something different. I was keeping it because I had not yet decided what I would and would not give back. Some things once taken for granted needed to be reclaimed before they could be returned on proper terms. I walked back to my car. I did not look at the house again. The drive home felt different from the drive over. Shorter somehow. Clearer. The last remaining piece of hesitation I had carried since Wednesday evening had been sitting somewhere behind my ribs, waiting to be dislodged. Jason's voice had done it not with cruelty, not even with awareness, but with the breezy, unconscious confidence of a man who had never once been asked to consider whether the thing he was using might have its own weight to carry. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I was not angry. I was decided. I drove to Claire's without calling first. She opened the door before I had finished knocking 3 knuckles on the wood, and the door swung back, and there she was, in her reading glasses and her old green cardigan, looking at my face with the particular attention of someone who has known you long enough to read what you are not saying. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." Her living room smelled the way it always did, old books and dried lavender and something faintly sweet from whatever she had baked that afternoon. A half-finished crossword puzzle sat on the coffee table beside a pen and a library book. Claire cleared the throw blanket from the armchair closest to the window and gestured for me to sit. I sat. I did not know where to start, so I told her about Jason's phone call first. All of it, the open storm door, the easy laughter, the words that had lodged themselves somewhere behind my sternum like a splinter too small to grip. When I finished, Claire set 2 mugs of tea on the table, pulled her cardigan tighter across her chest, and said, "Henry, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really answer it. Not the answer you give when you're trying to be reasonable, the real one." "All right," I said. "When was the last time Emily asked how you were doing?" She held up one hand before I could respond. "Not as a father, not as a grandfather, as a person. As Henry Walker, 68 years old, who might have feelings that have nothing to do with her children's bath schedule." My mouth opened. My mouth closed. I reached for my mug and wrapped both hands around it because my fingers needed something to hold. "She called on my birthday in March." I started. And what did she say?" Claire pressed gently. "She said happy birthday." I paused. "And then she asked if I could watch the kids the following Saturday because she and Jason had a dinner." Claire did not say anything. She just looked at me over the rim of her mug with those steady gray eyes, and the absence of her words was louder than anything she could have said. There was Thanksgiving. I tried again. My voice felt unsteady in a way I was not accustomed to. "She invited me. We had dinner together." "And where did you spend most of that evening?" Claire asked. I pressed my lips together. My chest ached with the specific weight of a memory I had filed away as unremarkable. "In the den. With Noah. He was overtired and upset, and Emily and Jason were entertaining her college friends in the dining room, and someone needed to stay with him." "Someone," Claire repeated quietly. "And that someone was always you." The tea was too hot to drink, but I lifted the mug anyway, needing the warmth against my palms. Claire leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and her voice dropped to something gentler, but no less precise. Henry, do you remember what Margaret used to say about you? Not to you, about you when she was talking to me. My throat tightened instantly. Claire, she used to say Henry gives everything quietly. She said it with love, but she also said it with worry. Claire's eyes went soft at the corners the way they always did when she spoke about Margaret. She told me once, maybe 6 months before she passed, that her greatest fear was not leaving you alone. It was leaving you alone with people who had learned to count on your silence. The words hit me somewhere so precise and so deep that I had to set the mug down before I dropped it. My hands were trembling, not violently, but with a fine, constant vibration, the kind that comes not from cold, but from something cracking open that has been sealed shut for a very long time. She said that. My voice came out barely above a whisper. She made me promise to tell you someday. Claire reached across and put her hand over mine, warm and firm. I kept waiting for the right moment. I think this is it. I pressed the back of my free hand hard against my mouth. My eyes burned. I was not going to cry in Claire's living room. I had decided that somewhere on the drive over, but the decision was working considerably harder than I had anticipated. She knew, I said when I trusted my voice again. She saw it even then. She saw everything, Claire said simply. She also saw how much you loved Emily. Those two things were never in conflict for Margaret. She just wanted to make sure that when she was gone, the love didn't become the only thing you had left to give. I looked down at Claire's hand over mine. Outside her window, the neighborhood had gone quiet in the way that Saturday evenings go quiet. A lawnmower somewhere in the distance, a dog barking twice and stopping the last light going orange through the oak leaves. Where? I said. I have spent 4 years showing up every time Emily called. Every single time. I canceled a fishing trip with Frank Dalton last September. I left my own lunch to drive across town in November. I threw away a museum ticket in February because she needed me on 20 minutes' notice. My voice steadied as I spoke, each word coming out cleaner than the last. And not once did she ask whether I had something else going on. No, Claire agreed. She didn't, because she never had to, I said. Because I never made her. Claire squeezed my hand once and released it. She leaned back in her chair and studied me the way she had always studied things that mattered fully without rushing to fill the space with words. Henry, she said at last, you taught Emily that your time had no competing value. Every yes you gave her was a lesson. She learned it perfectly. She tilted her head slightly. The question is whether you're willing to teach her something different. I thought about Emma's face on the front path that afternoon, those sharp, watchful eyes that missed nothing. I thought about Margaret's voice in Claire's words. I thought about the spare key still sitting in my shirt pocket. I already know what I'm going to do, I said. Claire raised an eyebrow. Are you going to tell me? I picked up my tea, and this time it had cooled enough to drink. I took a long, slow sip. Then I looked at her across the rim of the mug and felt something in my chest that was not grief and not anger, but something steadier and older than either the particular resolve of a man who has finally, after a very long time, decided to take up the space he was always meant to occupy. Not yet, I said, but you'll know when it happens. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around me, the creak of the hallway floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the particular silence of rooms that used to hold more life than they do now. At some point past 4 in the morning, I stopped pretending and got up. I went to the study. It was the room where I had spent 30 years drafting blueprints, running calculations, checking load tolerances and stress coefficients, on structures that other people would walk across, without ever thinking about what held them up. After retirement, I had mostly used it for storage. In the back corner, beneath a folded quilt Margaret had made the winter Emma was born, sat a cardboard box I had not opened since the week after Margaret's funeral. I pulled it out, set it on the desk, and lifted the lid. The photograph on top stopped me cold. Emily's college graduation. She was 22, laughing at something off-camera, her cap slightly crooked, her gown a bright royal blue. I was standing beside her in the dark suit Margaret had pressed the night before my hand on Emily's shoulder. My face wearing an expression I recognized even now as the specific joy of a man who believes everything he worked for has come out right. I set the photograph down carefully and reached for the journal beneath it. Margaret's handwriting on the cover in the green ink she always used, M.W. Private. My hands trembled as I opened it. I was not sure what I was looking for. Maybe I was not looking for anything. Maybe I just needed to hear her voice again, even in ink, even in the imperfect translation of words on paper. I turned pages slowly, entries from the early years of her illness, notes about medication schedules and doctor appointments, written in the same neat, unhurried hand she used for grocery lists and birthday cards. Then I found the entry from late October 4 years ago, 3 months before she passed. I read it standing up because my legs did not make the decision to sit down. She wrote, "Henry came home today from Emily's looking more tired than he should. I asked how it went, and he said, fine, just fine. The kids were wonderful." I watched his face while he said it. He was not lying exactly. The kids were wonderful. But something else was happening underneath the fine, something he has been doing for so long. He no longer notices he is doing it. He disappears for them. Not because they ask him to, because he cannot imagine doing otherwise. I wish I knew how to tell him that love is not the same as erasure. I had to stop reading. My throat had closed entirely. I pressed one hand flat against the open page and stood there in the gray pre-dawn light of my study, 68 years old, reading my dead wife's private fears about me, as though she were sitting across the room saying them aloud. My eyes burned so fiercely, I had to press the back of my wrist against them and hold it there for a long moment. She had known. All those years ago, before she was even gone, she had known what would happen. She had watched me come home from Emily's with the life quietly pressed out of me, and she had written it down because she loved me too much to say nothing and was too ill by then to say it the way she wanted. I turned 2 more pages. Another entry's December, her handwriting slightly less steady by then. I keep thinking about what Henry will do with all that patience once I am not here to receive it. He will give it somewhere. He always does. I only hope whoever receives it understands what it costs him. I hope they ask. The word ask hit me in the center of the chest, like something physical. I closed the journal. I sat down in my old desk chair, the one with the cracked armrest I had been meaning to replace for 6 years, and I thought about every yes I had given Emily in 4 years of widowhood. I thought about the fishing trip, the rain drive, the museum ticket, the 3 times I had already named aloud to Claire, the ones I had held up to the light and finally seen for what they were. But sitting here alone with Margaret's handwriting open in front of me, they did not feel like grievances anymore. They felt like evidence, a record of something that had been building for years without a name. I sat with all of it in the quiet of the study, with Margaret's journal on the desk in front of me, and the graduation photograph leaning against the lamp. "You knew," I said aloud to the empty room. My voice came out rough and uneven. "You wrote it down, and you couldn't tell me, and you wrote it down and hoped I'd find it." The room did not answer. But the silence it gave back was not empty. It had the quality of presence that I had learned in 4 years, to recognize the way a room can hold someone's absence so completely that the absence itself becomes a kind of company. I reached out and touched the cover of the journal with 2 fingers. "All right, Margaret," I said softly. I found it. I stood up. I went to the kitchen and made coffee. I sat down at the table with a notepad and a pen, the same way I used to sit down to begin a new project, methodically, without rushing, with the clear understanding that what I was designing had to hold weight. I wrote one line at the top of the page. What do I want to do on Father's Day? The answer came out of me so quickly and so completely formed that I understood it had been ready for a long time. I just had not asked. I wrote it down. Then I picked up my phone and called Frank Dalton. Frank Dalton answered on the first ring, which told me he had been awake for a while. Frank was like that, an early riser, a man who believed mornings were wasted on people who slept through them. We had worked together for 11 years at the same civil engineering firm, and in all that time, I had never once seen him arrive at the office after 7. "Henry Walker," he said, and I could hear the grin in it. "It's 6:30 on a Sunday morning. Either something's wrong or something's finally right." "Something's finally right," I said. "Well," a pause and then the sound of a chair scraping back, Frank settling in, giving me his full attention, the way he always did when a conversation mattered. "I'm listening." I told him about the cabin he had mentioned the previous fall, the one his cousin owned near Lake Lure in the Blue Ridge foothills of North Carolina, 2 hours south of where I lived. Frank had described it once over lunch, a screened porch over the water, good fishing off the dock, quiet enough at night that you could hear the owls. I had filed it away as something to do someday. Someday had arrived. "You want the cabin for Father's Day weekend," Frank said. It was not a question. "In for me and the grandchildren," I said. "Emma and Noah." A beat of quiet. Then Frank said, "Does Emily know?" "Emily knows I'll be with the grandchildren," I said carefully. "She doesn't know where." Another pause, longer this time. Then Frank laughed, a full, warm laugh that came up from somewhere deep in his chest. "Henry, you old fox. How long have you been planning this?" "Since about 4:30 this morning," I said. "Call my cousin," Frank said. "I'll text you his number right now. Tell him I sent you and he'll give you the family rate. There's a canoe in the shed and night crawlers in the bait freezer. The kids are going to lose their minds." 20 minutes later, I had a confirmed reservation for Friday the 13th through Sunday the 15th Father's Day weekend for 3 guests. I printed the confirmation page, folded it once, and placed it in the inside pocket of my jacket close to my chest. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and called Emily. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carrying the slightly distracted energy of someone managing 3 things at once. "Dad, hi. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. My voice came out warm and easy, steadier than I had expected, considering what was sitting folded inside my jacket. "I just wanted to call about the schedule you sent." A small shift in her tone. "Careful now." "Oh. Right. I wanted to talk to you about that." Did it all make sense?" I tried to keep it organized. "It was very organized," I said, and I meant it. "Emily, the kids and I are going to be just fine." The relief in her exhale was audible and immediate, like a valve releasing pressure. She was already moving on. Before I had finished the sentence, I could hear her opening a drawer, the rustle of papers, the sound of a woman whose mind had already checked this item off the list. "I knew you'd understand, Dad. It means so much to have you there. Jason's parents are really looking forward to this trip, and I want everything to go smoothly, and I just know the kids feel so safe with you." "They always do," I said. "You go enjoy yourself. Don't worry about us for a single minute. You are literally the best father in the world." Emily said, and her voice was bright and grateful, and completely certain the way it always was when she had gotten what she needed. "Have a wonderful trip," I said. "Give my best to Richard and Linda." I set the phone down on the table. For a moment I sat with my hands flat on the wood, feeling the particular sensation of having said true things in a misleading order, a skill I had never practiced before, and found I was unexpectedly capable of. The kids and I would be fine. She should not worry. Both of those statements were accurate. I had simply omitted the geography. I sent Claire a text message. "I answered your question." Her response came back in under a minute. "What are you planning?" I typed something overdue. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "Henry Walker, or if you are doing what I think you are doing, Margaret would be absolutely delighted." I looked at that message for a long time. Then I set the phone face up on the table, no need to hide it anymore. No need to keep anything face down, and went to the window. Outside, Margaret's oak tree stood full and green and unhurried in the morning light, the way it had stood through every difficult thing this yard had ever witnessed. "I'm figuring it out," I said quietly. The tree did not respond, but the light through its leaves shifted in a way that felt, if I was willing to let it, like something close to approval. That afternoon, I drove to the sporting goods store on Route 9 and bought 2 child-sized fishing rods, one pink with a butterfly decal for Emma, one blue with a rocket ship for Noah. I bought a small tackle box and filled it with bobbers and hooks and a package of plastic worms. I bought sunscreen and a package of disposable rain ponchos and a bag of the white cheddar popcorn that Noah had declared last Thanksgiving was the only good snack in the universe. I packed everything into the trunk of my car and drove home. Emily had built her perfect Father's Day weekend around my presence in a house where I did not want to be. What she did not know, what no one knew yet except Frank Dalton and his cousin in North Carolina, was that I had built a different one entirely, and for the first time in 4 years, every item on the itinerary was something I had chosen myself. I arrived at Emily's house at 8:30 sharp, the way the schedule had requested. The trunk of my car held everything I had packed the day before: the fishing rods, the tackle box, the rain ponchos, the white cheddar popcorn, and a duffel bag with my own things folded neatly inside. None of it was visible from the outside. I had covered it with an old moving blanket before I left my driveway. The house was loud in the way it always was when Emily had somewhere important to be. Through the front door, I could hear Jason's voice issuing rapid instructions about luggage weight limits. Emily's heels on the hardwood as she moved between rooms, and above it all, Emma and Noah arguing at the top of the stairs about whose backpack was blocking whose. I knocked and pushed the door open. "It's Grandpa." Emma came down the stairs so fast her socks lost traction on the bottom step, and she grabbed the banister to keep from sliding. "Grandpa, finally." She threw herself at me with the full momentum of a 10-year-old who had been waiting, and I caught her and squeezed hard, my chin resting on the top of her head for just a moment. Noah came down more cautiously, dragging a stuffed elephant by one ear. He walked straight to me and pressed his face into my side without saying anything, which was his version of a very serious hug. "Good morning, you two," I said, my arms around both of them. My chest felt full in a way that made it hard to breathe evenly. Jason appeared from the hallway, pulling a rolling suitcase phone wedged between his ear and his shoulder. He gave me a nod, quick, distracted, the nod of a man who has already mentally moved on to the next task. "Henry, thanks for this. Really appreciate it." He was already turning back toward the door before the sentence finished. I said, "Of course," and watched him go. Emily came down the stairs 2 minutes later in a sundress the color of sea glass, her hair done, her carry-on bag over one shoulder. She looked beautiful and hurried and completely at ease, the way people look when a plan is executing exactly as they intended. Dad. She kissed my cheek. The scent of her perfume was familiar. She had worn the same one since she was 19. You are an absolute lifesaver. I left notes on the counter about Emma's allergy medication, and Noah's been going through a phase where he won't eat anything green, so just don't even try with peas. It isn't worth it. Emily, I said gently. She stopped. We'll be fine, I said. Something flickered in her expression. The briefest pause, a half-second in which she might have heard something in my voice that was different from the usual yes. But then Noah tugged her sleeve and asked if he could sit by the window, and Jason called from the driveway that the car was loaded, and the moment dissolved. Richard Miller appeared in the doorway behind Jason, and for the first time I saw him clearly rather than at a distance. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 70s, well-dressed with the kind of steady eyes that suggested he had spent a long career in rooms where he needed to read people quickly. He crossed to me and shook my hand with both of his. "Henry," he said, "good of you to step in like this. The grandchildren are lucky to have you so close." The luck goes both ways," I said, and I meant it more completely than he could have understood. Linda Miller touched my arm as she passed, a brief, genuine gesture, the kind that comes from actual warmth rather than social obligation. "Enjoy your weekend," she said. "You deserve a restful one." The words landed in a strange way. I nodded and thanked her. 5 minutes later, the SUV backed out of the driveway. Emily waved from the passenger window, a bright, cheerful wave. The wave of a woman with an itinerary and a balcony cabin, and not a single doubt about what was happening at home. I raised my hand in return. I watched the car until it turned at the corner and disappeared. Then I looked down at Emma and Noah standing on either side of me on the front walk. "All right," I said. "Go inside and pack a bag." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Pack a bag for what?" 2 days, I said. "Clothes, your toothbrush, and one book each. And Noah, bring the elephant, if you want." Noah clutched the stuffed elephant tighter against his chest and stared at me with wide, suspicious, deeply intrigued eyes. "Are we going somewhere, Grandpa?" "We are," I said. "Where?" Emma demanded, already bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. "You'll see when we get there," I said. Emma grabbed my hand and tugged hard. "Grandpa, tell us. Is it a water park? Is it a zoo? Oh, is it one of those places with the trampolines?" "None of the above," I said. She tugged again harder. "Then what?" I looked down at her, at the bright, impatient, wonderful face of my granddaughter, who had Margaret's eyes and Emily's energy, and I was beginning to think a quality of perception entirely her own. "Something better," I said. Emma threw her hands up and ran inside, shouting for Noah to hurry up and pack. Noah looked at me for one more second with those serious brown eyes. Then slowly a smile broke across his face, the rare sunrise kind that he reserved for things he genuinely believed were going to be good. He ran inside after his sister. I stood alone on the front walk for a moment in the quiet left behind by the SUV and the shouting grandchildren and the morning that had just irrevocably tipped in one direction. The folded confirmation page was still in my jacket pocket, pressed close against my ribs. Emma asked if Mom knew about our trip. I told her Mom knew everything she needed to know. That was not a lie. Emily knew the children were with me. She knew we would be fine. What she did not know, what no one on that cruise ship knew yet, was that the man she had scheduled into her weekend like a household appliance had made entirely different plans. And by the time anyone figured that out, we would already be 2 hours south watching the Blue Ridge Mountains come up over the tree line. Before I tell you where I actually took Emma and Noah that Father's Day weekend, And trust me, Emily had absolutely no idea I want to hear from you. If you've ever been the person everyone counts on but nobody thinks to ask, drop the number 68 in the comments right now. That's my age. That's how long it took me to finally choose myself. Let me see how many of us are out there. And one more thing before we continue. Parts of what you're about to hear are drawn from real emotion but shaped into story. If that's not your kind of content, no hard feelings at all, this is a good moment to step away. But if you're staying, I promise the next part of this story is worth every second. Noah stopped asking where we were going somewhere around Statesville. For the first hour of the drive, he had kept up a steady stream of guesses from the back seat. A trampoline park, a dinosaur museum, a place he had seen advertised on television where you could pan for gemstones in a wooden sluice. Each time I shook my head, his guesses grew more elaborate and more improbable, until he suggested we might be going to see a real rocket ship, at which point Emma told him firmly that rocket ships were at NASA, and NASA was in Florida, and we were clearly heading south, not east. "How do you know which way is south?" Noah demanded. "The sun," Emma said with the authority of someone who had just learned this in 4th grade and was not done being proud of it. "It moves west in the afternoon. We're not driving into it, so we're going south." "That's actually correct," I said. Emma sat up straighter in her seat, delighted. Noah pressed his face against the window in defeat and watched the tree line thicken as the interstate gave way to smaller roads, and the hills began to roll up on either side of us, green and full and enormous. By the time we came around the last curve and the lake appeared below us, silver and wide and blazing in the late afternoon sun, Noah forgot entirely that he had been losing an argument. Grandpa." His voice dropped to a near whisper the way it did when something caught him completely off guard. "Is that a lake?" "That's Lake Lure," I said. "Are we staying there?" "Right on the edge of it." Noah let out a sound that was not quite a word, something between a gasp and a shout, and pressed both hands flat against the window glass. Emma craned forward from her seat and grabbed the back of my headrest. "Grandpa, is there a dock? Tell me there's a dock." "There's a dock," I said. She made a sound very similar to her brother's. Frank's cousin had left the tea under a ceramic frog beside the front steps exactly as promised. The cabin was smaller than I had imagined, and better a single-story structure with a screened porch running the full length of the back, looking out over a stretch of dock, and then open water with the mountains sitting behind the far shore, like something painted there on purpose. Noah was out of the car before I had the engine fully off. He ran straight through the cabin without stopping, screen door banging behind him, and I heard his sneakers on the dock planks, and then a shout of pure joy that echoed back off the water. Emma helped me carry the bags inside. She moved slowly, turning her head, to take in everything: the stone fireplace, the fishing nets hung decoratively on the wall, the kitchen with its 4-burner stove, and the red checked curtains over the window. "Did you plan all of this?" she asked. Her voice had gone quiet and careful, the way it did when she was processing something larger than she had expected. "I did," I said. "By yourself?" "By myself." She set her bag down on the kitchen table and looked at me with those eyes, Margaret's eyes, observant and unhurried, and said, "Grandpa, this is really nice." It was such a simple thing to say, but the way she said it with a gravity that did not belong to a 10-year-old's compliment about a weekend trip made my throat tighten unexpectedly. I nodded and told her to go check on her brother before he fell off the dock. That evening, after sandwiches eaten on the screened porch with the lake going dark and the first stars coming out over the mountains, I built a small fire in the stone ring at the edge of the yard, and the 3 of us sat in folding chairs roasting marshmallows on long sticks I had cut from a birch branch near the tree line. Noah had not been still since we arrived. He had run the length of the dock 4 times, identified what he believed were 2 different species of frog, declared the screened porch the best room he had ever been in, and eaten 2.5 sandwiches. Now finally the lake and the fire and the dark had settled him. He leaned against my arm with the drowsy, trusting weight of a child who has used up every last reserve of energy and has chosen to spend what remains against the nearest available person. "Grandpa," he murmured, eyes already going heavy, "can we fish tomorrow?" "First thing in the morning," I said. "Can I use the blue rod?" "The blue rod has your name on it." He made a small, contented sound and pressed closer. Within 10 minutes, his breathing had slowed and deepened, and his marshmallow stick had dropped into the grass, and he was asleep against my shoulder. Emma watched the fire. After a while, she asked without looking at me, "Grandpa, do you like doing this? Taking us places, I mean. Or do you just do it because we're family?" The question caught me somewhere I had not prepared for. I looked at her profile in the firelight, serious, and still nothing like the girl who had been bouncing on her toes that morning on the front walk, and I understood that she was not asking a child's question. She was asking something she genuinely needed to know the answer to. "I love being with you and Noah," I said. "I always have. From the very first day." Emma turned and looked at me directly. "But," I considered her for a moment. Then I said carefully, "But loving someone and being taken for granted are 2 different things." And it took me a while to understand that. Emma's forehead creased. She turned back to the fire and chewed her lower lip the way she did when she was working something out. Noah shifted against my shoulder and sighed deeply in his sleep. "I didn't know there was a difference," Emma said quietly. "Most people don't," I said. "Until someone shows them." She reached out and poked the fire with her stick, sending a small shower of sparks up into the dark. Then she looked up at me again, and her expression held something I had not seen before on her face. Something older than 10 and more serious than the moment called for, and absolutely genuine. "I'm glad you brought us here, Grandpa," she said. "I really am." I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close against my side, careful not to wake Noah. The fire crackled, and the lake made its quiet sounds in the dark, and above us the mountain sky was so full of stars it almost hurt to look at. I had not felt this much like myself in 4 years. I carried Noah inside and tucked him into the smaller of the 2 beds, still in his clothes. His stuffed elephant wedged under one arm. He did not stir. I pulled the quilt up to his chin and stood there for a moment in the dark of the room, listening to him breathe the deep, uncomplicated breath of a child who has had a genuinely good day and knows it. When I came back out to the porch, Emma was still sitting in her chair by the dying fire, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes on the lake. The water had gone completely black and mirror flat, reflecting the stars so precisely that it was difficult to tell where the sky ended and the surface began. She looked up when she heard the screen door. "Is he out?" "Completely," I said. "That child could sleep through a marching band." Emma smiled, and then she asked the question I had not seen coming. "Grandpa, what did you want to be before you became our grandpa?" I stopped walking. I stood on the porch boards with the night air cool against my face and looked at my granddaughter, who was watching me with an expression of genuine, patient curiosity, not the kind that wants a quick answer, but the kind that is prepared to wait for a real one. I sat back down in my chair. "I wanted to build bridges," I said. Emma's eyebrows went up. "Like actual bridges, suspension bridges, specifically the kind with the cables. I was fascinated by them from the time I was about your age. The way they work is counterintuitive. You hang a road from towers using steel cables, and the tension in the cables is what holds everything up. Pulling in opposite directions creates stability. I paused. I always thought that was a beautiful idea. Emma stared at me. Did you build any? One, I said. Early in my career, a pedestrian bridge over the Catawba River down in South Carolina. Nothing famous. But I designed the cable configuration myself, and the first time I walked across it after it opened, I cried a little. Emma's mouth dropped open. You cried! Engineers are allowed to cry, I said firmly, and she burst out laughing, a real laugh startled out of her, and the sound of it rose up into the mountain dark and made something loosen in my chest that I had not known was still tight. Why didn't you build more? She asked when she had recovered. I looked out at the black water for a moment. Your grandmother got sick, I said. Not all at once, it happened slowly over several years. I took on work that kept me closer to home, smaller projects, less travel. It was the right choice, and I have never regretted it. I paused. But it was a choice, and I made it without anyone asking me to. Emma's face went serious again. Did Grandma know? She knew everything, I said. She always did. Was she sick for a long time? Years, I said. But she never complained. Not once. She had I don't know exactly how to describe it. She had the gift of making difficulty seem temporary even when it wasn't. My voice had gone rough at the edges. I cleared my throat. She used to make your mother's lunch every morning, even when she was too tired to stand for long. She would sit on the stool at the kitchen counter and pack the bag from there. She said the day she stopped making Emily's lunch was the day Emily would know something was really wrong. Emma's eyes had gone soft and very bright. I didn't know that, she said almost to herself. There's quite a lot your mother doesn't know, I said. About me, I mean. About what I did and chose and gave up over the years. That's not a criticism of her. I never told her. I thought I believed that if you love someone, you carry the weight quietly and you don't make them feel it. Emma pulled her knees tighter to her chest. But that's not true. It's partially true, I said. The carrying is real. The love is real. But when you carry everything in silence, the people you're carrying it for can't see it. They come to believe the weight was never there. I looked at her directly. Does that make sense? She nodded slowly, her forehead creased in a way that meant she was working it through completely, not just accepting it. So they think it was easy, she said, when it wasn't. Exactly, I said. We sat with that for a moment. The fire had burned down to coals glowing orange-red in the stone ring. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called out that long, haunting, wavering note that sounds like something between a question and a warning. Grandpa, Emma said, I'm really glad you told me. So am I said. And I meant it in a way I had not anticipated. The telling itself had done something, released some pressure I had been holding so long. I had stopped noticing it was there. The next morning, we were on the dock by 7. I had set 3 rods up, Emma's pink one, Noah's blue one, and my old graphite rod that I had not used since before Margaret got sick. The morning was cool and still, the mist sitting low over the water, the mountains behind us just beginning to catch the early light. Noah was vibrating with energy, despite the early hour, bouncing on the balls of his feet, asking me every 45 seconds whether he had a bite yet. Emma fished with serious concentration, watching her bobber with the focused intensity she brought to everything she decided was worth doing properly. At 8:15, her line went taut. Grandpa, Her voice cracked with excitement. "Grandpa, I've got something." "Keep the tip up," I said, moving to her side. "Reel slowly. Don't rush it." "I'm not rushing! I'm not rushing! It's pulling so hard!" Noah dropped his rod and sprinted over, grabbing my arm with both hands. "Is it a shark? Emma, is it a shark?" "There are no sharks in a mountain lake, Noah." Emma gasped, reeling furiously. "There could be, there really could not," I said. The fish broke the surface, a largemouth bass, maybe 12 inches, twisting and flashing in the morning light. Emma screamed with delight, a pure, uninhibited sound of joy that startled a heron off a nearby log and sent it flapping across the water. Noah jumped up and down, shouting things that were not quite words. I reached down and helped Emma bring it to the net, and for a moment all three of us crouched over the side of the dock, looking at it green gold and alive and furious, and I felt the morning land inside me like something coming home. Emma looked up at me, her eyes shining, her cheeks flushed, her hair escaping its ponytail in every direction. "Grandpa," she said, "this is the best day." My phone vibrated in my pocket. I felt it 3 times before I registered what it was. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. Emily. Calling. I looked at the name. I looked at Emma, still holding the rod, grinning so wide, it seemed like her face might not be large enough to contain it. I looked at Noah, with his arm around his sister's shoulders, beaming at the fish, like it was a personal accomplishment. I put the phone back in my pocket. Whatever was happening on that cruise ship could wait a little longer. This moment, this dock, this fish this morning, had been 4 years in the making. It was not going anywhere, and neither was I. I only learned what happened on that ship in pieces. Some of it came from Emily herself weeks later, when enough distance had accumulated that she could talk about it without her voice breaking every other sentence. Some came from a private message Richard Miller sent me the night of Father's Day. I am telling it now the way I eventually understood it, assembled from those fragments, like a bridge drawn from separate surveys of the same ground. The dinner Jason had arranged was not a casual family meal. He had reserved a private dining room on the ship's upper deck, white tablecloths, a sommelier, a curated tasting menu, and he had spent 3 weeks preparing a presentation on a commercial real estate development project he wanted Richard to co-invest in. The cruise, the cabin upgrade, the shore excursions, the careful attention to Linda's preference for window seats and Richard's preference for single malt scotch, all of it had been infrastructure. A stage set. The kind of elaborate scene building that Jason was genuinely gifted at, which was I had come to understand precisely why he was so good at not seeing the cost of things he did not build himself. Emily told me later that she had known about the investment pitch from the beginning. She had helped Jason prepare the slide deck. She had agreed when he asked her that keeping the children at home with me was the cleanest solution. Professional childcare would have signaled to Richard that their household required outside help, and Jason believed that signal would undermine the image of stability and competence he was trying to project. When Emily said this to me, she said it in a voice that made clear she understood finally exactly what it meant. But that realization came later. On the ship at the dinner table, she was still operating inside the plan. Richard Miller asked about Emma and Noah before the appetizers arrived. "They're with my father," Emily said. "He loves spending time with them. He's so good with the kids." Richard set his menu down. "Did he have other plans for Father's Day?" Emily laughed, the practiced laugh of someone deflecting a question they have not prepared for. "Dad's retired. He's very available." Linda reached under the table and touched Richard's arm, a small private signal between two people who have been married long enough to communicate in gestures. Richard picked up his menu again, but something had shifted in his expression, a slight tightening around the eyes that Emily noticed and filed away. Jason launched into his presentation after the first course. The slides were polished. The projections were detailed. Richard listened with the focused, non-committal attention of a man who has heard many pitches and knows how to absorb information without revealing his response to it. Halfway through the second course, Emily's phone showed 3 missed calls from an unknown number, her neighbor. She realized whom she had asked to check on the house. She stepped away from the table. The neighbor reported the house was empty. No car, no lights, no children. Emily came back to the table with her face rearranged into something she hoped looked like composure. "Everything all right?" Linda asked. "Fine," Emily said. "Completely fine," but her hands, she told me, were trembling under the tablecloth. She pressed them flat against her thighs and smiled and picked up her wine glass and said nothing. Richard Miller looked at her across the table and said quietly and without drama, "Emily, call your father." She called. I did not answer. She called again. I did not answer. She sent a text. No response. By the time Jason had finished his presentation and Richard had asked 3 precise probing questions about the financing structure, Emily had called my number 4 times. Richard pushed his dessert plate aside and looked at Jason directly. "The project has merit," he said, "but I'd like to table the discussion until after the weekend." He paused. "I find it difficult to concentrate on investment strategy when I'm wondering whether my grandchildren's grandfather is sitting alone somewhere, wondering why no one bothered to ask him if he had plans." Jason's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped near his temple. "Henry is completely fine with this arrangement." Emily confirmed. "Jason." Richard's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "I am asking you as plainly as I know, how did you ask Henry Walker directly whether he was willing to spend Father's Day caring for your children?" The dining room was very quiet. Jason looked at Emily. Emily looked at her wine glass. The sommelier who had appeared in the doorway with a new bottle took one look at the table and retreated. "We assumed," Emily said finally. Her voice had gone very small. He never says no." Richard nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who has just had a long-held suspicion confirmed. "That," he said, "is precisely what concerns me." Linda reached across and covered Emily's hand with her own. Her touch was kind, but her voice when she spoke was not soft. "Sweetheart," she said, "assuming is not the same as asking, and available is not the same as willing." Emily told me those 2 sentences had gone through her like cold water. She sat with them at that white tablecloth table in the private dining room her husband had booked to build an impression of a perfect family, and she felt the impression crack straight down the middle. Richard Miller did not commit to the investment that night. He told Jason he would review the materials and follow up in 2 weeks. Jason barely spoke on the walk back to the cabin. Emily stared at the ceiling of their stateroom long after Jason fell asleep, and for the first time since she had sent me that color-coded schedule, she asked herself the question she should have asked 3 weeks earlier. She told me later she did not sleep at all that night. Noah had talked me into a second round of fishing after lunch, and I was helping him rebait his hook when my phone started vibrating against the dock planks in a way that suggested it had no intention of stopping. I picked it up. The screen showed the family group chat, a thread I normally associated with birthday wishes, holiday photos, and the occasional forwarded recipe from my sister-in-law. What was on it now looked nothing like any of that. I counted 14 new messages in the time it took me to read the first one. Emily had posted at 12:47, "Has anyone heard from Dad? He's not answering his phone. Getting a little worried." Thomas, Emily's cousin on Margaret's side, a straightforward man who worked in insurance and had never once, in my memory, said anything in the group chat that was not factual, had responded 6 minutes later. Why wouldn't Henry be home? Isn't he with the kids this weekend? Emily, he is. He's just not picking up. Thomas, where exactly are they, Emily? At the house. He's probably just busy with Emma and Noah. Then came the message that changed the temperature of everything. Richard Miller typing from the ship. Did Henry agree to this? I read those 4 words 3 times. Then I set the phone down on the dock beside me, looked out at the water for a moment, and picked it up again. The thread had kept moving. Emily. Of course he did. He's family. Richard Emily. That is not what I asked. Then a gap of 11 minutes, which I imagined was the duration of a very uncomfortable conversation in a cruise ship corridor before Emily posted. Again, Dad has always helped with the kids. He loves them. This isn't anything new. Thomas, who had apparently been waiting with considerable patience. Emily, I'm going to ask this once, and I'd appreciate a straight answer. Did you ask Henry directly before making these arrangements whether he was available and willing? Another gap. Shorter this time. Emily, I sent him the schedule. Thomas. That is not a yes. Noah tugged my sleeve. Grandpa, my bobber went under. Reel it in slowly. I said, my eyes still on the screen. Is something wrong? He asked. He was 7, but he had his mother's instinct for reading the atmosphere of a room, or in this case, a dock. Nothing's wrong, I said. You've got a fish to land. He turned back to his rod with total conviction. Emma, who had been reading in the screened porch and had come out to watch, settled herself cross-legged at the end of the dock and looked between me and the phone with the careful neutrality of someone who has decided to observe rather than ask. I read on. Aunt Patricia Margaret's younger sister, who lived in Raleigh and had always possessed a quality of quiet precision that made people listen when she finally chose to speak, had entered the thread. Has anyone considered that Henry might have had his own plans for Father's Day? He is, after all, also a father. The thread went quiet for 4 minutes. In group chat, time 4 minutes is a very long silence. Then Jason. This is being blown completely out of proportion. Henry is with the grandchildren. Everyone is fine. Richard Jason. I have asked you to stop. Those 5 words from Richard landed in the chat like something heavy dropped from a height. Jason did not respond again. Thomas posted next, and what he posted made my breath catch. He had taken a screenshot of the schedule Emily had shared in the group chat 10 days earlier. The color-coded hour-by-hour document with my name filling every block involving the children, and he reposted it now with a single line beneath it. This is what was sent to Henry. I am asking whether anyone believes this constitutes an agreement. Aunt Patricia, it does not. An account I did not immediately recognize, one of Emily's college friends, who had been added to the family chat years ago and rarely posted. Wrote, I'm sorry. But why is this man's Father's Day being used as free childcare? Noah landed his fish, a small bluegill that flipped and caught the light beautifully, and let out a whoop that startled Emma off her cross-legged position and sent her scrambling to look. I helped him hold it for a moment, told him it was a fine catch, and watched him lower it back into the water with the careful reverence of a child who has just understood that living things deserve to be handled gently. It went home, Noah said solemnly, watching the water close over where the fish had been. It did, I said. My phone vibrated again. I looked at the screen. Emily calling directly. Emma glanced up from the water and met my eyes. She did not say anything, but her expression asked the question clearly enough. I looked at my granddaughter, this careful, perceptive child, who had stayed up talking to me by a dying fire the night before, who had asked me what I wanted to be before I became her grandfather, who had held a fish in her hands that morning, like it was something precious. I looked at the phone. Then I answered it, because I had decided days ago that I was not going to hide from this. I was not going to let Emily tell whatever story she needed to tell without hearing at least once from the person she had written into every box on that schedule without a single conversation. "Emily?" I said. Her voice came through tight and fast, wound up like a spring that had been compressed for hours. "Dad, where are you? Where are the children I have been calling?" "The children are safe," I said. "We're together. We're doing very well." "Where are you? Why aren't you at the house?" "I made other plans," I said. The line went very quiet. Then her voice came back, and it had a new quality in it. Not quite anger yet, but the sound of something beginning to understand that it is no longer in control. "Dad, what does that mean?" Emily's voice had been building toward this call for hours, and the pressure of it came through the line before she had finished her first sentence. "Dad, what do you mean you made other plans? Where are you?" "I have called 6 times. I had this neighbor check the house and nobody was there. Not you, not the kids, nobody. And I have been sitting on this ship for the past 3 hours, trying not to panic." "Emily." My voice came out calm. Not cold, I want to be clear about that. Not punishing. Just calm the way a load-bearing wall is calm, steady under pressure, precisely because it was designed to be. "The children are safe. We are together. There is nothing to panic about." "Then tell me where you are." Her voice cracked on the last word. "We're in North Carolina," I said. "At a cabin on Lake Lure. We went fishing this morning. Emma caught a largemouth bass, and Noah is very upset that his was smaller." A sound came through the phone that I could not immediately classify, somewhere between a gasp and a sob and a short, disbelieving laugh. "You took them to North Carolina?" "I did." "Without telling me?" "Yes." "Dad." Her voice shook now, the careful composure she had been holding since the neighbor called finally beginning to fracture. "Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you tell me? I've been terrified." "Emily." I kept my voice even unhurried. "I need to ask you one question, and I need you to answer it honestly." A pause, then warily, "What? When did you ask me?" The line went very quiet. Not the quiet of a dropped call. I could hear the ambient sounds of the ship behind her, the faint hum of the engine, a door closing somewhere. She was there. She was simply not answering. "Emily," I said, "when did you ask me whether I was available this weekend? When did you call me or come to see me or sit down with me and say, 'Dad, we're planning this trip. Would you be willing to spend Father's Day with the grandchildren?' When did that conversation happen? You always—" She started. "When did it happen?" I said again, gently but without moving. The pause this time was longer. When Emily spoke, her voice had dropped to something smaller than I was accustomed to hearing from her. "I sent you the schedule." "That is not the same thing," I said, "and I think you know that." I heard her exhale a long, unsteady breath that told me she was working very hard to keep herself together. Emma had come to the edge of the dock and was watching me with her arms wrapped around herself, her face unreadable but her eyes tracking every shift in my expression. Noah mercifully had wandered to the far end of the dock and was crouching over the water looking for frogs. "Dad," Emily said, and now her voice had that quality I had heard perhaps twice in her life, stripped of its confidence, stripped of its certainty, down to something younger and more frightened underneath. "Are the kids okay? Are they really okay?" "They are wonderful," I said, and I meant it completely. Emma read 2 chapters of her book this morning and caught the first fish of her life. Noah has named every frog he's seen and is currently trying to name a 4th one he believes is living under the dock. They are having, by any reasonable measure, a very good Father's Day weekend. A sound came through the phone that I recognized as crying, not the loud, demonstrative kind, but the quiet kind that happens when someone is trying not to let it show. Emily cried the same way as a child when she was ashamed of something rather than just hurt. "I didn't think," she started and stopped. "No," I agreed quietly. "You didn't." "Dad, I'm sorry. Emily." I kept my voice from going sharp, though it cost me something. "I'll have the children home Sunday evening the way I said. They're safe, they're happy, and they have had an experience this weekend that I think will matter to them. I hope you enjoy the rest of the cruise." I paused. "Give my regards to Richard and Linda." "Dad, wait!" Her voice surged, suddenly urgent. "Please don't hang up. Please, I need to say something." I waited. "I know I didn't ask you." The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. "I know that. I've known it since Richard asked me at dinner last night, and I couldn't answer him. I knew it, and I told myself it didn't matter because you never say no, and I told myself that meant it was fine, and I—" Her voice broke completely on the last syllable. She pulled in a breath that sounded ragged and raw. "I told myself a lot of things that I don't think are true. I stood on the dock with the mountain lake spread out around me, and the afternoon light turning the water to hammered gold, and my daughter crying quietly 400 miles away on a cruise ship, and I felt the particular weight of a moment that could go in more than one direction. Emily," I said, "we are going to have a real conversation about this. Not now, not on the phone, not while you're on the ship and I'm standing on a dock in North Carolina. When you're home, when we can sit across from each other, we will talk." "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Dad." "Go be with your family," I said. "I'll call you Sunday when we're on the road." I ended the call. Emma was still at the end of the dock watching me. She did not ask what had happened. She simply walked to the cooler we had brought out for drinks, opened it, took out a bottle of water, and brought it to me. I accepted it. I cracked it open and drank half of it in one long pull. "You okay, Grandpa?" she asked. "Better than I've been in a while," I said. She studied my face for a moment, with those precise, unhurried eyes. Then she nodded once, as though something had been confirmed to her satisfaction, and went back to her chair. After dinner, Emma asked if she could call her mother. We had eaten at the picnic table on the screened porch, grilled cheese sandwiches, and tomato soup from a can. The kind of meal that tastes better outdoors than it has any right to. And Noah had fallen asleep on the couch inside with the television murmuring softly to itself before 8 o'clock. The evening had gone quiet and blue around the cabin, the lake flat and dark below the porch, the first fireflies just beginning to appear at the tree line. "Of course," I said. "Take your time." I stepped outside to give her privacy. The porch screen let sound through more freely than Emma probably realized. I did not move far. I sat in the Adirondack chair at the far end facing the water, and I told myself I was not listening. That was not entirely true. Emma's voice came through the screen, clear and careful, the way she spoke when she had decided something mattered and was treating it accordingly. "Hi, Mom." Emily's response was immediate, urgent. I could hear the tinny shape of it through the phone, though not the words. Emma waited for it to finish. "I'm okay," Emma said. "Grandpa took us somewhere really nice. We're at a lake. I caught a fish this morning." A pause. It was a largemouth bass. Grandpa said that's a good kind. More tinny sound from the phone. Emma made a small sound of confirmation. Mom, can I ask you something? Whatever Emily said in response, it was brief. Do you know what Grandpa wanted to be when he was young? Emma asked. Like before he was an engineer. The phone went quiet enough that I could no longer hear Emily's response at all. He wanted to build bridges, Emma said. Suspension bridges. He told me last night. He built one when he was young, and he cried when he walked across it the first time. A pause. Did you know that? I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth. My chest had gone very tight. He also told me about Grandma. Emma continued, and her voice had shifted slightly, still careful, but with something underneath it now, something that had been building since the night before at the fire. He said she was sick for a long time. He said he changed the kind of work he did, so he could stay close to home and that he never regretted it. Another pause. He made her lunch every day, even at the end. Did you know that either... I could hear Emily's voice now higher than before, asking something. Emma's response was quiet. I'm not trying to make you feel bad, Mom, she said. I didn't know those things. I've known Grandpa my whole life, and I didn't know those things about him. Her voice was steady, but I recognized the effort it was costing her, the deliberate steadiness of someone who has decided to say something important and is not going to let feeling get in the way of it. And I started thinking about why I didn't know. And I think it's because nobody ever asked him. The fireflies at the tree line had multiplied. I watched them without counting. Mom. Emma took a breath. Did you ever ask Grandpa what he wanted to do on Father's Day? The silence that followed was the longest of the entire evening. I sat with my hand still pressed to my mouth, and my eyes burning in a way I had not prepared for, and my heart doing something complicated and painful inside my chest, not breaking exactly, but stretching the way things stretch when they are being asked to hold more than they were built for. Emily was saying something. I could not hear it. Emma listened, and her next words told me what it had been. I know he loves us, Emma said. That's not what I asked. Another pause. I think Grandpa does a lot of things for people, Emma said, and now her voice had lost its careful steadiness and gone soft in a way that sounded very young and very certain at the same time. He plans things for us, and he shows up, and he fixes things, and he's always just there. And I don't think anybody asks him if he wants to be. She stopped. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I think we just expect him to be. I stood up from the Adirondack chair. I could not sit still anymore. I walked to the railing at the edge of the porch and gripped it with both hands and looked out over the black water, and my eyes were burning so fiercely that the fireflies blurred into streaks of light, and I had to blink hard twice to clear them. I heard Emma say goodbye. I heard the soft tap of the phone being set down on the indoor table. Then the screen door opened, and she came out onto the porch, and she found me at the railing. She came and stood beside me. Her shoulder reached just below my elbow. She looked out at the same water I was looking at. I didn't mean to make her cry, Emma said quietly. I know, I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Did I do the right thing? I looked down at her, this girl 10 years old, who had asked her mother a question that I had spent 68 years not asking anyone. I put my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close against my side, and my throat was so tight that for a moment I genuinely could not speak. You did, I said finally. You did exactly the right thing. Emma leaned into me and exhaled a long breath, the kind that comes at the end of something that took more courage than it looked. We stood there together at the railing while the fireflies continued their slow, brilliant work at the tree line, and the lake held all of its dark and patient stillness below us. And somewhere on a cruise ship 400 miles away, I imagined my daughter sitting with a question she finally could not answer. Emma went to bed not long after our conversation on the porch, climbing in beside Noah, without waking him, pulling the quilt up and closing her eyes with the calm finality of someone who has done something difficult and come out the other side of it intact. I stayed outside. The lake at night had a quality I had forgotten. Existed a depth of quiet that city living files away, after a while the kind of silence that is not actually silent at all, but layered alive, full of water sounds and insect sounds, and the occasional distant call of something wild in the tree line. I sat in the Adirondack chair with a glass of water and my phone and let the night do what it wanted around me. At 9:47, a message arrived from a number I had saved only once, Richard Miller's private cell, which he had pressed into my hand at Emily's wedding 12 years ago, with the words, "In case you ever need a friend in the Miller corner." I had never used it. I had kept it the way you keep certain things, not because you expect to need them, but because the gesture of giving them deserved to be honored. The message read, "Henry, I want to apologize. Linda and I did not know the full arrangement. We believed you had been consulted. I am sorry that we were part of a situation that treated you otherwise." I read it twice. My throat tightened in a way I had not anticipated from Richard Miller. I typed back, "I appreciate that, Richard. More than you know." His response came quickly, as though he had been waiting. "I want you to know something else. Jason's proposal did not move forward tonight. I told him I don't make investments with people who treat family as overhead." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Overhead. The accounting term for costs that support operations without directly producing value. I had spent 4 years being overhead in my own family, and Richard Miller, a man I had met perhaps 15 times in my life, had named it more precisely than I had managed to myself. I typed, "That was between you and Jason. You didn't need to tell me. Richard, I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Emily is a good woman who has learned some habits that don't serve her well. I hope she unlearns them. Linda and I are fond of her, but fondness doesn't excuse what happened this weekend." I set the phone down on the arm of the chair and looked at the dark water. What happened on that ship after Emma's call? I pieced together later, partly from Richard's messages, partly from what Emily eventually told me, and partly from a brief, uncomfortable conversation I had with Jason 3 weeks later when he showed up at my door alone, without Emily's knowledge, looking like a man who had been arguing with himself for a long time and had finally lost. Emily had come back to the cabin after her call with Emma and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. Jason had asked what Emma said. Emily had told him word for word the way she repeated things when they had shaken her, precisely without interpretation, as though the words themselves needed to be examined from the outside. Jason had said, "She's 10. She doesn't fully understand the situation." Emily had turned and looked at him and said, "She understood it better than either of us did." That had started an argument that lasted past midnight. Not a screaming argument, but the grinding, exhausting kind that goes in circles. Because both people know, somewhere underneath the words, that the problem is not with the other person, but with a pattern they have both been participating in for years. Jason had said Emily relied on her father too much. Emily had said Jason had encouraged it because it saved them money and convenience. Jason had said that was unfair. Emily had said she was beginning to reconsider what fair meant. Linda Miller had knocked on their cabin door at 11:15 to ask if everything was all right. Jason had said yes. Linda had said gently, but without flinching, that she could hear them through the wall and that she and Richard would be happy to talk in the morning if it would help. and that she thought very highly of Emily's father, and hoped the weekend had not cost him more than anyone intended. Jason had closed the door and stood with his forehead against it for a while. Father's Day morning broke clear and cool over the lake. I woke before 5, which I had not done voluntarily in years. I made coffee in the small cabin kitchen, poured it into a heavy ceramic mug, and carried it out to the porch. The water was perfectly still, the color of pewter in the early light, the mountains behind the far shore just beginning to separate themselves from the sky. I sat down. I wrapped my hands around the mug. I breathed. No schedule waited for me. No list of tasks with my name beside each one. No phone calls that needed answering. No plans that required my compliance. Just the morning and the lake and the coffee going warm between my palms, and somewhere inside the cabin, 2 children sleeping peacefully in a bed I had chosen and paid for, and driven 2 hours to reach. For the first time in 4 years, Father's Day began with something that belonged entirely to me. Noah appeared at 6:15, padding out in his socks, the stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, his hair flattened on one side and wild on the other. He climbed into the chair beside me without ceremony and looked at the lake. "Happy Father's Day, Grandpa," he said, his voice still thick with sleep. I looked at this 7-year-old boy, my daughter's son, my wife's grandchild, the child who had declared white cheddar popcorn the only good snack in the universe, and had spent the previous afternoon trying to name frogs, and felt something move through my chest that was warm and enormous and entirely uncomplicated. "Thank you, Noah," I said. He leaned against my arm. "Can we fish again? After breakfast?" I said. "Can I have the blue rod again?" "It's yours all weekend," I said. He made a sound of deep satisfaction, settled himself more firmly against my arm, and looked back out at the lake. After a while, he said with the absolute confidence of someone stating an obvious fact, "This is the best Father's Day ever." I looked at the pewter water and the pewter sky and the mountains coming slowly into color at their edges. "Yeah," I said. "It really is." We packed up the cabin after lunch on Sunday. Noah cried a little when we loaded the car, not dramatically. Not the kind of crying that demands attention, but the quiet, private kind that happens when a child has had something genuinely good and feels it ending. He pressed his face into my side for a moment in the cabin doorway, before he climbed into the back seat, and I held the back of his head with one hand and did not rush him. "We'll come back," I said. "I'll call Frank's cousin in August." Noah pulled back and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and a very serious expression. "Promise. Promise," I said. He wiped his face with his sleeve and climbed in. Emma was already buckled, her book open in her lap, her face arranged in the careful neutrality she used when she was feeling something she had decided not to perform for an audience. We drove the 2 hours back mostly in companionable quiet. Noah fell asleep before we reached the highway. Emma read without looking up for the first 40 miles, then closed her book and looked out the window at the hills flattening back into Piedmont, and the Piedmont giving way to suburb. "Grandpa," she said, "are you and Mom going to fight?" "We're going to talk," I said. "That's different." She considered this. "What if she doesn't really listen?" "Oh, then I'll know what I need to know," I said. Emma turned that over for a while. Outside, the landscape had gone fully suburban, now shopping centers and traffic lights, and the familiar geometry of the neighborhoods we both knew. "I think she'll listen," Emma said finally. "She was really quiet on the phone last night after I asked her." A pause. The kind of quiet that means something got through. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "When did you get so perceptive?" Emma looked up and caught my eye in the mirror. "Grandma," she said simply, as though that explained everything, and perhaps it did. We pulled up to Emily's house at 4:15. The SUV was in the driveway, which meant Emily and Jason were already home from the port. The house looked exactly as it always did. The front beds newly mulched, the porch light on, even in the afternoon, the doormat straight and centered the way Emily kept everything straight and centered. Emma and Noah unbuckled before I had fully stopped the car. Noah grabbed his elephant and his backpack and ran for the front door. Emma got out more slowly, came around to my window and looked at me. "You okay?" she asked. It was exactly what she had asked me on the dock after the phone call, in exactly the same tone, direct without performance, genuinely wanting to know. "Better than okay," I said. She held my gaze for one more second, then nodded and headed for the front door. Emily appeared before the children had cleared the threshold. She looked different, not disheveled. Emily was never disheveled, but something in the careful assembly of her appearance was slightly off the way. A frame looks when a painting has been moved and rehung at a marginally different angle. Her eyes found mine over the children's heads as they pushed past her into the house. Noah was already shouting something about frogs. Emma disappeared inside. Emily came down the porch steps. She stopped 2 feet from my window. For a moment she simply looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us reached for words immediately, because the words that were needed were too large for a driveway exchange. "Dad," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but the effort of making it so was visible in the set of her jaw, the slight tension around her eyes. Was it a good weekend?" "It was the best one I've had in a long time," I said honestly. Her chin moved slightly, a small, involuntary tremor that she controlled immediately. "I'm glad," she said, and she meant it. I could tell the gladness was real, even though it was sitting on top of something complicated and heavy. "We'll talk," I said, "when you're ready." "I'm ready now," she said quickly, too quickly. The words came out with the urgency of someone who has been rehearsing them. "Not now," I said gently. "Not in a driveway, when we can sit down properly." I paused. "Tuesday. Come to the house." She pressed her lips together and nodded. Jason appeared in the doorway behind her, and when he saw me looking, he lifted his hand in a brief, subdued wave. Not the distracted, over-the-shoulder wave of the man who had barely registered my presence on Friday morning, but something more careful, more considered. I raised my hand in return. I drove home the long way again. Past the elementary school, past the park, with the swings, through the old neighborhood, where the oak trees had grown so large their roots were lifting the sidewalk. That evening I went back to the study. I opened the box again, not to grieve, not to rehearse old pain, but because I wanted to sit with Margaret a little while before the week that was coming. I picked up the graduation photograph, the one where we were both standing in June light outside the ceremony hall, and I looked at my own face in it for a long time. I had been so certain in that photograph that I knew what love required of me. "I'm learning," I told the photograph. "Slowly, but I'm learning." I put it back. I closed the box. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the window looking out at the oak tree in the last of the evening light. Tuesday was 2 days away. I had things to say that I had never said out loud to another person. I had spent 68 years carrying them, and I had carried them quietly the way Margaret had always known I would. It was time to set them down, not to discard them, but to show them to someone who needed to see. Emily arrived at 2 in the afternoon alone. No Jason, no children. She sat down across from me in the living room, in the same chair she used to do her homework in when she was 12, and folded her hands in her lap the way she did when she was bracing for something. I did not ease into it. "Emily," I said, "I need you to listen." not respond. Just listen. She pressed her lips together and nodded. I told her about the September fishing trip I canceled when she called about Noah's ear infection. I told her about driving 40 minutes through November rain to pick Noah up from a dinner, not a meeting. I told her about the museum ticket I threw in the recycling bin without looking at it again. I told her about Mrs. Patterson who lost a weekend's income because Emily decided the word family was a sufficient substitute for the word asked. Emily's eyes filled as I spoke. She did not try to wipe them. She sat with the tears running and kept her hands folded and kept her promise to listen. Then I reached behind me and placed Margaret's journal on the table between us. I did not open it. I did not need to. Emily looked at her mother's handwriting on the cover, and her breath caught so hard it was audible across the room, a sharp, broken sound, like something giving way under pressure it had been holding too long. Your mother wrote something before she passed, I said. She wrote that her greatest fear was leaving me with people who had learned to count on my silence. I kept my voice steady, though my chest ached with the effort of it. She wrote that she hoped someday someone would give something back. She made Claire Thompson promise to tell me. It took 4 years and a Father's Day weekend in North Carolina for that message to land. Emily's chin crumpled. She pressed her fist to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Emily. My voice dropped. I am not angry that you needed me. I have never once in 68 years been angry about being needed by the people I love. I leaned forward so she could not look away from my face. What I am sad about, what I have been sad about for a long time without knowing how to say it, is that you never once thought I had the right to say no. A sound came out of Emily that I had not heard since she was a child. Raw and unguarded, the sound of something breaking open that had been sealed shut. She pressed both hands over her face, her whole body folding forward with the weight of it. I stood up. I crossed the room and sat beside her and put my arm around her and held on the way I had held her through every hard thing since she was small enough to fit entirely in the crook of my elbow. She cried for a long time. I let her. When she could speak, she lifted her face and looked at me with red, swollen eyes and said, Dad, did I make you feel like you didn't matter? The question hit me somewhere precise and deep. I took a breath. You made me feel like I mattered only when you needed something, I said. That's different from mattering. She flinched as though I had said something physical. Then she nodded slowly with the particular heaviness of someone accepting a truth they cannot argue with. I need you to hear my terms, I said quietly. Going forward, if you need my help, you ask directly with enough notice for me to say yes or no. If I say no, that is not a rejection of you. It is me being a person. I kept my voice gentle but did not soften the words themselves. I will not cancel my own plans to cover arrangements you made without me. I want to be part of this family as a father and grandfather, not as a default. Emily absorbed each point with her eyes on my face, nodding slightly after each one. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Dad. Then she reached out and took my hand in both of hers and held it tightly the way she had held my hand, crossing streets when she was 4 years old. Her grip was fierce and a little desperate and entirely genuine. At the door, she paused with her hand on the frame. The same door frame she had measured her height against every birthday until she left for college. She turned back and looked at me with her red-rimmed eyes and asked something I had not heard from her in longer than I could measure. I had an answer ready. For the first time in 4 years, I had one. Emily called before 9 on a Sunday morning 1 week after Father's Day. I'm coming over, she said. Don't eat breakfast. She arrived 40 minutes later with Emma and Noah ahead of her. and a white paper bag that smelled of cinnamon the moment it crossed the threshold. Noah launched himself at me with his full 7-year-old body weight, and I caught him and laughed a real laugh, the unguarded kind that comes up before you can decide whether to let it. "We got the big ones," he announced. "With the extra frosting." I picked. Emma set the bag on the table with quiet ceremony. Emily came in last, carrying coffee, no phone in her hand, no bag over her shoulder. She looked at me across the kitchen and said, "Sit down, Dad. We've got this." So I sat down, and for the first time in longer than I could account for, someone else handled the morning. Emma poured orange juice into Margaret's green-tinted glasses, the ones from the craft fair in Asheville, irregular and beautiful, the kind that make ordinary light look like something worth keeping. Noah distributed napkins with the gravity of a child performing an important ceremony. Emily set a coffee in front of me and took the chair across the table. We ate. The rolls were enormous, and the frosting was excessive, and everything about them was exactly right. Noah got frosting on his chin and didn't notice until Emma pointed it out. Emily caught my eye over his head and pressed her lips together against a smile, the first easy expression I had seen on her face all week. After breakfast, Emma took Noah outside. Through the kitchen window, I watched her show him the oak tree pointing up at the branches. Noah grabbed the lowest one and hauled himself up with pure determination, announcing each branch to the yard at a volume that required no amplification. Emily wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me. "Dad," she said. Her voice was quiet and undecorated, the way it had been at the end of Tuesday's conversation. "I want to ask you something." "All right," I said. She took a breath. "How do you want to spend today?" 4 words. The kind of sentence that takes 2 seconds to say. I had spent 4 years not hearing it, without knowing that was what was missing. My throat tightened. I turned toward the window for a moment, toward Noah crowing from the second branch, toward Emma below him, with her arms half raised, ready. Then I looked back at my daughter. "I think I'm already doing it," I said. Emily's eyes went bright and wet. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers and held on. Outside, Noah reached the 3rd branch and let out a whoop that startled a robin off the fence and sent it across the yard in a flurry of wings. Emma cheered. The sound came through the open window and filled the kitchen completely. It was not a grand moment. It did not need to be. It was a Sunday morning in June with good coffee and cinnamon rolls, and my daughter's hand on mine, and my grandchildren climbing the tree their grandmother had planted when their mother was still young enough to believe everything would stay simple forever. That was the only gift I ever wanted. It just took until now for anyone to think to give it. I have told you this story the way it happened, slowly, quietly, the way most important things happen when you are not paying attention. If I could offer you one thing from all of it, it would be this: do not wait as long as I did. Do not spend years making yourself smaller so that the people you love never have to feel the weight of needing you. Love is not erasure. Love is not silence. I believe God placed us on this earth to give, but also to receive, to be seen, to be asked. The day my daughter finally asked me what I wanted was the day I understood that I had been the one standing in the way of that question all along. I was too patient, too quiet, too willing to disappear into other people's plans and call it devotion. Don't do what I did. If someone takes your time without asking, say something not in anger, but clearly before 4 years pass, and the cost becomes something no one can fully repay. Your time is not a spare room that anyone can move into. It belongs to you. Protect it the way you would protect anything you cannot get back. These are family stories. Revenge teaches us quietly that the most powerful thing you can do is not fight back, but simply stop giving what was never truly asked for. Real family drama revenge does not look like chaos. It looks like a man booking a cabin on a lake, and finally, for the first time, choosing himself. And perhaps that is the only kind of family stories revenge worth having, the kind that ends not with destruction, but with a Sunday morning cinnamon rolls and 4 honest words from someone you love. If this story reached something in you, if you have ever felt like the person everyone counts on but no one thinks to ask, leave a comment below and tell me. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not yet joined this family, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than I can say. The story you just heard contains certain fictional elements crafted solely for reflection and emotional resonance. If this type of content is not for you, we respect that completely. Feel free to step away and find what speaks to your heart instead. But if you stay, know that every story here is told with honesty, care, and the hope that something in it makes your own life a little clearer.